Okay, thanks for the invitation and nice introduction, Gesa. And thanks for all for coming to listen to me today. As Gesa said, I'm working on animals in my PhD thesis now, but I did not go further away from climate or seasonality, as you can see from my master's. And today I decided to talk about in general scope of my PhD thesis, but with a focus on the large mammal part that I will tell later, because that's the actually more or less done part. But first, let me show you what it is. I'm working on seasonality effects on wildlife populations by using data from different species and different systems. As I said, overall focus is the seasonality. And we all know that the environment that the species live in can affect their population demography through resources, shelter, disturbances, or inter and interspecies interactions, which in turn can shape all this habitat use preferences and population demography around. And since most natural populations inhabit environmental areas that are highly seasonal, this seasonality can also affect all of these things that I said already. And again, in turn, affect population demography and give us some idea of how and when should we try to save them, actually. This seasonality has been recognized in the field in a really long time, to be honest, but still not many studies take this into account because they collect data at annual steps because it's logistically easier. But collecting data at annual steps is kind of overlooking the changes within a year. That's why overlooking the seasonality and can cause biases in population estimates. Other thing that I'm focusing on is different data resolutions, meaning you're seeing from this the lower resolution to the higher resolution. This is a representation of presence absence data. Middle one would be the count data, and the highest resolution would be the individual based data. And I'm checking the seasonality effect on all these type of data sets using different hierarchical analyzers. With these two base points, I have three main sections based on the three different data sets I'm using. First one is the presence absence data of large mammals in Turkey. Second one is the count data of Aldabra giant tortoises in Seychelles. And the third one is the individual based data of gray mouse lemurs in Madagascar. So I divided all these into subsections, obviously, because we wanted to see the effect of seasonality in all types of population structures, so we could actually grasp the whole idea in a system. This will hopefully make me see that how seasonality affects every population in these places, and they're all wild populations and real life data sets. And hopefully I can come up with some evidence-based conservation recommendations. And as if I did not have enough problems trying to get a PhD degree, I decided to do everything in Bayesian, because why not? Today, as I said, I will mostly focus on this chapter here, because this is more or less the one I'm done with. For the two subsections under this, I used occupancy models and used data from an extensive camera trap study. First, I checked the seasonality effects on individual species by single species occupancy models and tried to come up with a pattern of how does this seasonality affect habitat use patterns of each species. And then by using these single species models, I did a multi-species one. And this time I checked the predator-prey dynamics and how the seasonality affect their co-occurrence patterns and habitat shifts in an area. Maybe some of you know occupancy analysis can be either static or dynamic. What do I mean with this static and dynamic? In the most basic words, static systems, the occupancy state does not change through time in these systems, and it gives me the probability of a site being occupied or unoccupied at that time. On the other hand, in the dynamic systems, now this occupancy state can change through time with these additional colonization and desertion probabilities. Desertion is the probability of an occupied site being unoccupied in the next time step, and the colonization is the probability of an unoccupied site being occupied in the next time step. And of course, all of these are corrected for my imperfect detections coming from the data and observation and the field work. For those you maybe don't know and need a reminder, this is what it looks like, the imperfect detection. It means that we cannot actually see all the animals that are in that area, we will definitely miss some. And we need to account for this error in the models. So for single species models, I just use a dynamic model to see the changes in the seasonal occupancy states for each specific species. And then for the multi-species models, first I use the static framework to determine the seasonal occupancy of a site. For this, I divided the site as a winter and a summer site and assumed that it does not change between winter and winter or summer to summer, but there's a difference between winter and summer. And the ones that I saw the seasonality effect, this time I was interested in how does this seasonal occupancy state changes through time. Then I applied the dynamic framework. Yeah, so I mentioned that we are using camera traps, and it is coming from this very nice camera trapping study in northwestern Turkey, thanks to our collaborators Anıl and Alper there. Yeah, if you are wondering about camera traps, we can also talk more, but basically they are pretty easy and standardized, and they allow us to collect data 24/7 in an area with all the biodiversity in the area mostly. And this area is actually highly seasonal because there is a temperature fluctuation and a precipitation variation between winters and summers. That's why I focused on winter and summer as a two-season category. And this camera trapping study looks like this from a close shot. It started in 2007 and went until 2010. Then there was some logistics and stuff, so they had to stop until 2014. But right now it's still going on, mainly in the wildlife protection areas in there. It's covering 10 main tent sites and 171 camera trap stations, which you can see as green dots here. And we have information on 11 large mammal species with more than 80,000 camera trap nights so far. Yeah. Together with seasonal framework, I also checked some anthropogenic and environmental effects on the habitat use of these large mammals. For anthropogenic covariates, I had mainly information of human population and road network in the area. And for environmental covariates, I had season, habitat type, and the terrain characteristics being elevation, slope, aspect, and ruggedness. Okay. Now I will show you first the results from the single species analysis, but to make it a little more simpler, this is what we expect from that. I basically checked the seasonality effect on detection probability, colonization probability, and desertion probability for each large mammal species. From the colonization and desertion probability, I could come up with a number called true occupancy of a site, which basically gives you if that site being used by that animal at that time or not. Yeah. And I used, as I said, Jack's language for that. And maybe some of you know, I adapted the code from the Carey and Royal's book, from Applied Hierarchical Modeling book. Yeah, so these are the results. And some of the species, as you can see, showed strong seasonality. Here I'm showing the colonization probabilities of roe deer and red fox in the area. And roe deer was only affected by seasons themselves. And you can see that colonization probability is always higher in winter and summer transitions than summer to winter transitions. And for the red fox, it was a little bit more interesting. It was affected by both seasons and human population density. And when human population density was low, colonization probability was higher during winter to summer transitions. But as the human density increased, it shifted, and now it is higher in summer to winter transitions. So this actually shows us not only the seasons themselves, but the anthropogenic effects can also influence the species seasonality. On the other hand, some species did not show any seasonality, but we could still see the negative effect of humans. Here you're seeing colonization probabilities again for roe deer and gray wolf. And you can see there's decline with increasing population density, but no effect of seasons. And lastly, in some species, we did not detect any effect at all. There are several reasons that might be it. For example, these are, by the way, desertion probabilities this time, just for an example. And for example, for lynx, it's a really small population in the area, and they're also maybe, they're pretty shy species, so it's really hard to detect them. So our data is much lower than the other mammal species in the area. And hare is also distributed mainly in the eastern side of the study area, so they're not occurring everywhere. So again, our data is less, so maybe that was the reason. But overall, we did not see any effect at all. But as I mentioned, all these colonization and dispersion estimates led me to these true occupancy through consecutive seasons. And as you can clearly see, some species show stronger seasonality than the others. So with this thing, I can summarize the first chapter here. I basically showed you that there is no general seasonal pattern in species habitat use. That means there's no seasonality that fits to everyone. It can change with seasons. Also, other effects like anthropogenic impacts in the area. And maybe it's like stating the obvious, but from this chapter, species-specific sensitivity of seasonality seems to be important. So with that in mind, I use these models now to do multi-species analysis. Seasonality can also influence the species interactions with each other. And here we focused on the predator-prey dynamics because in our area, we can observe that more than the other interaction types. And also in terms of habitat use, predators and prey can influence each other very effectively. So yeah, we wanted to check the seasonality effect on the predator-prey dynamics. Again, before showing what I found, I will simplify what we expect. So this time, I mentioned several slides before, I used both static and dynamic approach. And static approach gave me the co-occurrence patterns of predator and prey pairs, and also effect of prey presence absence on the occupancy probability of the predator when I assume that this occupancy state does not change through time. And with dynamic ones, when I assume it does change, it gave me again colonization and desertion probabilities with the effect of prey. And again, I could come up with the true occupancy of the pair in an area. Yeah, so I created this predator-prey pairs from 4 prey species, which are red deer, wild boar, roe deer, and hare, and 2 predator species being generalist gray wolf and specialist Eurasian lynx. So in our study area, lynx is preying heavily on the European hare. We know that from the previous research. So we actually wanted to check that specifically because of the specialist behavior. And also it does not prey on red deer, so we did not check for that. And at the end, we had 7 pairs. Yeah, now first I will show the co-occurrence results. And they look a little intimidating, but it's fine. So first, it's the lynx and its prey species for both summer and winter seasons. And the diagrams are showing percentages of sites over 171 camera trap stations. And gray areas indicate sites that are unoccupied by both species. Purple indicates sites that are occupied by both species at the same time. Orange indicates sites that are occupied only by prey, and blue indicates sites that are occupied only by predator. And from a first glance, we can see from the purple areas that the co-occurrence of lynx and its prey species are actually not that high. And there is definitely no indication of seasonality between winter and summer. There's no difference, basically. But when we focus on the lynx and hare pair, the proportion of the co-occurrence side, co-occupied side in purple and the predator-only side in orange, we can see that they do overlap in the most of the places lynx occur together with the hare. So with that, we can actually say that they do have a higher co-occurrence than the other species, other prey species for lynx. Same diagram for wolf. Now there's also red deer. And again, there was no seasonality, but this time co-occurrence was much higher in all the prey species with wolf. There are several reasons for that, again, because population is bigger and also wolf can roam more sites than lynx maybe. And it does look like it has a higher co-occurrence with boar and roe deer, but that's not the preference of the wolf actually. Wild boar and roe deer are distributed in the area so much more than other prey species. They basically occur everywhere at every site. So that means they encounter with the wolf more and we have a higher occurrence for them. but overall wolf did not prefer the species in this analysis. Yeah. So now I will show the effect of prey presence on the seasonal occupancy of the predator again. And again, we are assuming this occupancy state does not change through time. Here I will only show the effect of roe deer and hare on wolf because we actually saw some seasonal indicators in these pairs. Yeah, and here now I'm showing on y-axis the occupancy probability of the wolf, and x-axis is the human population density. Left column is when roe deer is present, and right column is when roe deer is absent. And when you look at it, when roe deer is present in an area, there is no seasonality, but we can see that occupancy of the wolf is decreasing with increasing human population density. But when roe deer is absent in the area, then we do see a clear seasonal pattern, and the occupancy of the wolf is higher in summer than in winter. And this might be because increased roaming range of roe deer in summer with the higher food abundance. That means that they can go anywhere because there's food everywhere, and they would roam more, and wolves will try to follow them to prey and also occupy more sites with them. Interesting thing is when there's the seasonality effect, we don't see the negative human density effect anymore. It does not change with the human density. And this does actually kind of shows us that preying is more important driver for wolves' habitat use patterns than the actually human disturbance itself. The same thing for European hare effect on the wolf, but this time we see the opposite effect. There was no seasonality when European hare was absent in a site, and there was seasonality when European hare was present at a site. And this time occupancy of the wolf was lower in summer than winter, because in summer actually hares are less active, so they do occupy less sites, which causes wolves to occupy less sites as well. Again, the human impact just vanished when we saw the seasonality, one more time emphasizing that preying is a more important driver for the wolf. Yeah, so I showed you that we saw some seasonality in these pairs. That's why we actually now check the changes in the seasonal patterns with the colonization and desertion parameters, starting with the roe deer effect on wolf again. I'm not going to go so much into details because you can actually see there is no significant difference between seasons or prey presence absence in either colonization or desertion parameter in here. But when we calculated again the true occupancy of a site from these two parameters, now we do see a clear seasonal pattern, again in consecutive seasons. And again, these are the number of sites that are co-occupied by both prey in purple, occupied only by predator in blue, occupied only by prey in orange, and unoccupied in gray. And it was always higher in summer when the site was occupied only by prey, which is roe deer in this case, or co-occupied by both species, and always high in winter when the site was unoccupied or occupied only by the wolf. And this is indicating right now that the seasonality of this pair is actually coming from the seasonality of roe deer, and it is actually highly affecting the wolf's habitat use patterns as well. Quickly, same thing for the European hare on the wolf. You can see my confidence intervals are just everywhere. So no significance at all again. But again, what we're interested in is this plot one more time. When we calculated that, it's definitely much weaker seasonality in this pair one more time. And this is an important result because it shows that the same predator gives different responses to different prey in terms of co-occurrence. And maybe it's again like stating the obvious, and we already expect this, but from a seasonality perspective, it shows this interspecific seasonal variation, which we should account more in conservation studies instead of focusing on one or two species in the area when there are actually much more that are affecting one type of focus species. Yeah, and for this chapter now, again, I said that there's seasonal variation in the co-occurrence patterns of the wolf and prey. I did not show, but there was none in the lynx and prey, probably again because of the less data of lynx. And we could see the generalist behavior of the wolf because it overlapped with all of the prey, and the specialist behavior of the lynx, it has overlapped more with the hare. And also in both predators, the human impact could be seen on the habitat use either directly on them or indirectly through the prey. Yeah, this actually concludes my first chapter in my thesis. And now I would like to quickly tell you what I've been working on for the last couple of months, which is the most complex data set I have, individual based data of mouse lemurs, and which requires more complex analysis. This also has kind of sub-chapters that I roughly came up with. Right now, I am doing actually a survival analysis on this data set by using maybe, you know, Cormack-Joly-Sieber models. My aim is actually detect season-specific survival and recapture rates. And because I want to plug that season-specific survival rates into a matrix population model and give them again, maybe future climate scenarios and see how the population is going to do 30 years from now. And this is already kind of like a vulnerable population in the area, and maybe come up with some conservation efforts again. Also, since the shape-wise, the study system is a perfect rectangular, I will show you in a minute. We also want to try the spatial analysis because it's going to be hopefully so easy. And it will also give us the seasonal home ranges in the area, and we can see if they're changing with this changing environment through the years. Yeah, speaking of system, here it is. It's a data set from German Primate Center collected and started by Peter Kappeler and Claudia Fichte. They are behavior ecologists, but they were doing this capture-recapture study since 1994, actually. And it's located here in the Kirinde Forest in Madagascar. And system looks something like this. There is the path between this yellow and red bricks here. And they just like trap in all of this transaction points in the area. I'm using only the data from this red area, which is actually consisting of 160 trap locations, more than 17,000 observations as of last month, I guess, and more than 1,600 individuals so far in 27 years. And this area is highly seasonal as well. It is close to tropics, as you know. And this is just a snapshot of an annual rainfall pattern in green. You can see that it is highly variable. And also you can see the minimum and maximum temperature within a year. Yeah, area is consists of dense forests, so it's not really easy to go in there, even in the dry season. And in the wet season, it's actually getting much worse because it's so hard to reach the area. But data is still collected year round, and I'm using all year data actually. But species is highly adapted to this seasonality. Yeah, during wet season, there are more food and much fleshy fruits around, so they are much more active. And yeah, they're everywhere basically. And in the dry season, with the scarce food, they are really inactive. They even go to something called torpor. It's like a inactive state, not as much as hibernation. They're not knocking off, but they do sleep a lot, especially females, because they want to survive this poor conditioned season as much as possible. And data collection here is done with these Sherman traps because these species are super small, one of the smallest primates. They can fill a cup, really. And we bait them with peanut butter and banana or just banana, and they just go for it, no matter what. And we trap them in the evening. We put the traps in the evening and we collect them in the early morning and bring it back to lab. And then we release them again in the evening when they should be actually waking up. Here you're seeing me releasing one, and you can see how small it is, like this much. And this was like a fat adult, actually. Okay, this is kind of the sampling scheme I made for myself to visualize it that I'm using in the model, but I'll walk you through it. So this is basically, we have calendar years as the normal years from 1994 to 2020, which are these white lines here. And then we have natural years in the area, which is based on the annual rainfall pattern, which is, I decided from the previous plot I showed, it should start from May and end in May. So I'm actually using this natural year as a year in my model. and calculate my climate variables according to that. And based on that, I am assuming that the dry, since there's no certain point that one season starts and certain point that that season ends, I'm assuming that dry season is effective from May until end of September, and the wet season is from October until end of April. And again, there is data collection year-round, but I said, let's assume, again, there are only 2 occasions we actually go to field and collect the data, which is just before dry season in April, May, June, and just before wet season, September, October, and November. I'm doing this to make it easier for the model to understand what we want out, and for me also to show the difference between 2 seasons. So with these occasions, we can calculate the seasonal recapture probabilities. And from the transition between seasons, we can calculate the survival probabilities. So transition between dry to wet season will give me dry season survival because they need to survive to be captured in the wet season again. And transition from wet to dry will give me wet season survival. And this is an example model that I'm doing, just to show you what I have in mind. So basically, I divided the data set into male and females because it's easier to run them indifferently because I have so many individuals. And also, I can check effects of everything on each sex separately. And what I'm checking is always an age effect because we have juveniles and adults. And then I start to check season and climate variable interactions, additives, and single effects separately. And there's always a random year effect because I want to see if there's a variability between years on the survival. And yeah, as I said, I'm checking all the possible combinations of season and climate variables, and hopefully I will come up with one final model depending on assessing what parameters are the most significant and take this big survival estimate number from those models. And quickly, I have 3 climate variables that I'm focusing on, and this is like where I get them. If you did not use Google Earth Engine, it's really good. You should all use it. Yeah, I'm using rainfall and minimum and maximum temperatures in the area because, as I said, you can see from the annual rainfall pattern, they are highly effective. And this is how I actually check the parameter significance. And I will actually maybe get feedback from here for these things because I'm a little confused in general. But what I'm trying to do actually, for example, here, I was checking for the effect of maximum temperature and the lag effect of maximum temperature, which was the previous season's maximum temperature on survival with their interaction. And I can see that since the credible interval is overlapping with 0, interaction effect doesn't seem to be significant. So my aim is actually try these for every combination of models. And by eliminating 1 by 1 parameters, just come with a final model and use that. Yeah, but of course, I'm also looking at effects, effect plots. And this is the interaction of season and maximum temperature on both females and males. But these are like super preliminary results that I did like 2 weeks ago. These are all subject to change again. Maybe I'm doing something wrong too. But from the first glance, it looks like there's an obvious difference between males and females and how they are getting affected from seasonality, because you can see that males are in wet season. It looks like they are not getting affected at all. They're really doing well. But in dry season, when there are like, when the maximum temperature is lower, their survival is getting lower as well. Yeah, this is what I am at so far. My next steps would be finalizing these models and select the best model for each sex and each climate. I will also check the effect of population size and lag effect of population size. Then hopefully I will do a population viability analysis using this life cycle here and see how hopefully population will do good in the future, and we'll see. Yeah, actually I'm kind of done, but if I think I have a little bit more time. So to come up to a whole circle, I can tell you something about the system in the Aldabra with the Aldabra giant tortoises. So the Aldabra atoll in Seychelles are actually one of the largest remaining giant tortoise populations in the area. And they are like, after the Galapagos ones, they are the other largest land tortoises, or terrestrial tortoises. And being the largest vertebrates on the island is pretty small. They are actually acting like ecosystem engineers, but their population is already red listed by the IUCN. So they are kind of like, everybody is trying to save them in that area right now. Yeah, this atoll also has two distinct seasons, being a wet and a dry season, and also highly affected from the monsoon cycles in the area. With these transitions between two seasons, mainly what's affecting the tortoises are the vegetation, because vegetation abundance and vegetation places and also vegetation types are getting highly affected when these seasons are changing and how. And of course, they are using these for both shelter reproduction and as a food resource. But in a recent study in 2017, they found that the drought frequency is increasing in the area, which means there's less rain, which means this transition is shifting, which means they are getting confused when the vegetation is going to come up, or how, or is it going to be good quality. So as I said, they're already red listed, so people are kind of freaking out if they're going to be wiped out from the island. Yeah, and my main question, since I have the count data, is how this seasonality and the projected changes in seasonality will affect the habitat use patterns and local abundance in the area. And this is how the system looks like. The Seychelles Islands Foundation is doing count surveys, I think also since like 1993, 1994. And they are doing in the 3 of the 4 sub-islands in the area, mainly Picard, Malabar, and Grand Terre. And here are where they do the transects. I circled them in the blue circles. Yeah. Again, as I said, they are counts, and the abundance analysis and mixture models are the direct way to go to do this. I am planning to investigate the seasonal habitat use patterns of these tortoises by using these models and check how the seasonal shifts are affecting them. And also, since there are like 3 sub-islands, they're highly diverse in terms of vegetation type and turf type, if they can find. Some of them are more rockier than the others. I can also check the effects of these on their abundances and maybe come up with, again, how if they have a preferred habitat in the area. Well, actually with that, that's it for me. I would like to thank my collaborator, supervisor Arbat, and all the collaborators for each chapter and people who helped me along the way. And thank you for listening. I would be happy for any feedback and suggestions.